The Descent into Evil Addiction, The Path from Pleasure to Perversion. Introduction. To understand the chilling depths of evil addiction, we must first explore how it begins, often innocuously, with the pursuit of pleasure. Pleasure, in its purest form, is a natural and healthy part of human existence. It drives us to seek joy, love, and connection. But when pleasure is abused, overindulged, and taken to extremes, it can lose its glow, pushing individuals to seek out more intense and ultimately darker forms of gratification. This is where the seeds of evil are sown and where the descent begins. Stage 1. The overindulgence in pleasure. At the outset, the desire for pleasure is a normal part of life. But for some, this desire becomes an insatiable hunger, driven by an underlying need to feel more, to escape, or to fill a void. This overindulgence often starts with the abuse of the reproductive system, hypersexualization being one of the most common forms. Hypersexualization, fueled by the constant bombardment of sexual imagery and the normalization of excessive sexual behavior, can distort an individual's relationship with their own body and with others. What begins as a pursuit of pleasure can quickly spiral into an obsession. The brain, repeatedly exposed to intense sexual stimuli, begins to dull its response to ordinary pleasures, much like a drug addict requiring larger doses to achieve the same high. The neurological impact, desensitization, and the dulling of pleasure. As overindulgence continues, the brain undergoes significant changes. The pleasure centers become desensitized, requiring more and more stimulation to achieve the same level of satisfaction. This is particularly evident in those who abuse their reproductive systems through hypersexualization or excessive sexual behavior. The neurotransmitters responsible for pleasure, dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins, are released in large quantities during sexual activity. However, when the brain is flooded with these chemicals too frequently, it begins to build a tolerance. The initial euphoria fades, and the individual finds that what once brought immense pleasure now feels muted, dull, and insufficient. This is the critical turning point. Faced with the diminishing returns of ordinary pleasure, the individual begins to seek out new, more extreme forms of gratification. The door to experimentation with the forbidden, the taboo, and the irrational is now open. Stage 2. The allure of the forbidden. As the brain becomes desensitized to normal pleasures, the individual may start to experiment with behaviors that go beyond what is rational or reasonable. The allure of the forbidden becomes stronger as the individual seeks out experiences that are novel, intense, and potentially dangerous. This can manifest in various ways: through the pursuit of more extreme sexual experiences, the crossing of moral and ethical boundaries, or the exploration of power dynamics that involve dominance and submission. The thrill of breaking societal norms, of stepping into the unknown, provides a temporary surge of pleasure that the brain now craves. But this experimentation is not without consequence. Each foray into the forbidden chips away at the individual's moral compass. What was once unthinkable becomes tantalizing, and the lines between right and wrong begin to blur. Stage 3. The shift to sadism and the neurological rewiring. As the individual continues to push boundaries, they may eventually cross into sadistic behavior. Sadism, in this context, becomes a way to regain the intensity of pleasure that has been lost through overindulgence. The brain, now accustomed to extreme stimuli, begins to associate the infliction of pain, whether physical or emotional, with pleasure. This shift is marked by a significant neurological rewiring. The pleasure centers that were once stimulated by normal, healthy experiences are now activated by the suffering of others. The brain's reward system is hijacked, creating a perverse association between cruelty and gratification. The sadist's neural networks realign, reinforcing behaviors that would have once caused disgust or shame. Instead, these behaviors now trigger a release of dopamine and endorphins, further entrenching the addiction. The individual is no longer seeking pleasure for its own sake. They are seeking the thrill that comes from wielding power over others, from violating the sanctity of life and morality. Stage 4. The spiral into evil. As the addiction deepens, the sadist's behavior escalates. Ordinary acts of cruelty no longer satisfy. They need more. More suffering, more domination, more control. The brain, now fully rewired, demands greater extremes to achieve the same biochemical response. This is where the descent into evil becomes all-consuming. The individual loses their ability to find joy in anything other than the suffering of others. Their emotional state becomes increasingly detached, cold, and calculating. Relationships are replaced by manipulative power plays, and empathy is all but extinguished. The sadist becomes trapped in a cycle of ever increasing depravity, where the pursuit of pleasure is intertwined with the need to dominate, to control, and to destroy. The once vibrant human being is now a hollow shell, driven by a dark addiction that consumes their every thought, every action, and every desire. Stage 5: The consequences, a life consumed by addiction. The final stage of this descent is a life consumed by addiction. The sadist's world becomes a narrow, joyless place where the only source of satisfaction is the suffering of others. Their relationships, their ability to experience true happiness, and their connection to the world around them are all sacrificed on the altar of their addiction. The brain, now fully rewired, cannot easily return to a state of normalcy. The pathways that once allowed for healthy pleasure and connection have been overridden by those that demand cruelty and domination. The individual is left in a state of perpetual craving, forever chasing a high that can never truly be satisfied. Conclusion: a cautionary tale. The Descent into Evil Addiction is a cautionary tale about the dangers of overindulgence and the abuse of pleasure. When pleasure is taken to extremes, when the boundaries of what is rational and reasonable are crossed, the door to darkness is opened. The brain, in its quest for more intense experiences, can lead the individual down a path where pleasure becomes inextricably linked with pain, power, and cruelty. Understanding this process is crucial, not just for those who may be at risk, but for society as a whole. By recognizing the signs of overindulgence and the dangers of hypersexualization, we can take steps to prevent the slide into addiction and the devastating consequences that follow. As we leave here today, let us remember the importance of balance, of moderation, and of maintaining a healthy relationship with pleasure. For when pleasure becomes an obsession, it can lead us to places we never intended to go, into the depths of addiction and into the clutches of evil itself. The audience is left in a state of deep reflection.